Hey, Hannah.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Not too bad. Hope to get outside a little bit more today, but which is like,
Greetings.
hey, Mike. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Christine.
Hi, Joe. I'm eating real quick while I'm waiting.
No worries at all. Mm,
Hi, everyone.
alrighty.
Great. Let me just get oriented to the CDNR page. Great. It is 5:03, and without objection, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Christine, was there something you like? I usually don't get to see you. Hi.
No, I'm presenting tonight, so you guys get to see my face tonight. So sorry to be so alarming, you guys.
Great. Then the first item, and I guess before we do that, just want to say that this is the first meeting of CDNR of the new council year, and we've got a new member, Hannah King, who's replacing Sarah Carpenter. We still have Joe, and I'm still the chair. But with that, we've got the minutes from the March 1st meeting. I'd probably look to Joe since Hannah wasn't there to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do we need a motion on the agenda first?
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. And then the next item on our agenda is the public forum. I don't think we have too many members of the public with us, but for those who don't know, we are less formal in committee than we are in council, and so we generally give the public a chance to speak after presentations and ask questions and do it more as a little bit of a round robin. But would anybody like to speak for public forum? Not seeing anyone, we'll go to presentation. So Christine, it's all yours.
Hi, thank you. I'm Christine Curtis. I am a community development specialist at CEDO. I also staff the CDNR committee meeting. So I'm going to be juggling both things tonight, but it's a small meeting, so hopefully I will do just fine with that. So I'm going to give the committee a brief presentation, and then I will take any comments or questions afterwards, since we're a small group though. I'm also informal if there's something really pressing that you want to ask or you want me to clarify, because I'm going to try to go through quickly. Please just interrupt me and we can go from there. So I'm going to share my screen. Come on. Okay, so I'm here to talk to the committee tonight about the 2023 draft action plan. This is going to be kind of informational only at this point, but this item will be going to the full council, I hope, at the end of May. Full disclosure, though, I am seeking CDNR sponsorship tonight for this item, if you all feel so inclined to do so, but we can talk about those details at the end of my presentation. So a little background first. So the City of Burlington, every year we are allocated an amount of money from HUD in the form of grants. Those are 2 grants, the CDBG and the home grant. These programs or grants are provided as a principal revenue source for local communities like Burlington to address the roots and consequences of poverty. So in order for the city or CEDO to access and utilize these funds, we have to draft an annual action plan to HUD outlining all of our actions and activities that we plan to execute throughout the year that will address the priority needs and goals that we identified in our 5-year con plan. So this action plan, the 2023 action plan, is going to cover the program year that starts July 1st of 2023 and it ends June 30th of 2024. Just a little bit more background before we get to the good stuff. So every year, the city will solicit proposals from nonprofit organizations and city departments for CDBG funding. All CDBG eligible applications are then reviewed, scored, and the funding recommendations are made by the Voluntary Citizen Advisory Board, also known as the CDBG Advisory Board. This board consists of NPA representatives, mayor appointees, and a representative from the state. So the advisory board makes CDBG funding recommendations for the external applications only. So that is for the nonprofit organization applications. And then CEDO staff like myself and the CEDO director, we make the funding recommendations for any internal or city department applications. A little side note there, I think it's important to know that the majority of the CDBG applications do go to the advisory board for review. I would say probably around 90%. So they do get the bulk of these applications. So the home grant, the home program operates a little bit differently. It doesn't go through such a rigorous process as the CDBG grant. Home applications are received and reviewed on a rolling basis throughout the year, and that is reviewed and processed by CEDO housing staff. Okay, so we are going to, next I'm going to be sharing with you the programs and the recommended awards. Before I get to those tables, it's a lot of information. I'll leave the screens up for you to review while giving you some side notes. I do want to say I'll be presenting the CDBG projects and awards in 2 separate categories. There's a public service project category and a development project category. So we're going to look at the public service projects first. I lied. We're going to talk about funding first. So let's talk about what we're going to be working with before you can see where we decided to put this money. So the funding is pretty straightforward. The top section there is our entitlement funds for 2023. This is the grant, our annual allocation from HUD. The middle there is carryover funds. We had carryover funds for CDBG and home this year, which can be helpful to top off that total there at the bottom. CDBG at $759,311 and home at $685,309. So those totals will be reflected in this 2023 action plan we're talking about, and you will see that assigned to the awards coming up on the following slides. Okay, now we are going to get to the good stuff, the awards and the projects. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is CDBG, right? These awards are for CDBG public service category. As you're reading through some of this information, I want to give you some important notes. This was a very kind of interesting and somewhat difficult year for CDBG in that we received an abnormally high amount of applications. We received 22 total applications. That's external applications and city department or internal applications. Of those 22 applications, 19 were CDBG eligible. So that means I reviewed them, deemed them eligible, and then move them forward for review by either the advisory board or by CEDO staff. Of those 19 CDBG applications, the total monetary ask was over $2.1 million. And as you recall, we only have 759,000 to work with. So this made for a very, very difficult year as far as reviewing and scoring applications and deciding where this money should go. And again, that burden really laid heavily with the advisory board as they review the bulk of these applications. And they did a really thorough and phenomenal job doing so, I must say. So public service awards. At the end of this presentation, if you want to backtrack to any slides, I'm happy to do so and give you more details, but I'm going to keep going for now. These are the development projects in the awards. I also included on that last line item, the CDBG administration. That is always capped at 20% of the 2023 CDBG allocation. So that money goes to funding several CEDO staff salaries, and that is used to help implement and manage this grant throughout the year. So our development awards, recommended awards for now, this is still in draft form. And then we don't want to forget about home. Home is much more straightforward. Again, since they accept and review applications on a rolling basis, we don't have as many like project details to share at this point, but this is standard process for how the home program works. So I wanted to at least share with you the numbers so you can kind of see how things break out. Again, that line item on the bottom, same thing, it's admin and planning for CEDO staff who help manage the grant throughout the year. That is capped at, I believe, 10% of the home allocation. That's your home numbers. So timeline, present to CDNR, that's what we're doing right now. Here we are. As I mentioned, we are hoping you all, as you have in the past 2 or 3 years, I believe, we're hoping that you will sponsor this item. It will be going as a resolution to the full council. We're hoping at the end of May for approval. We do officially have scheduled and on the books, May 15th is our public hearing at City Council. So this is mandatory as part of our action plan process. We have to have a public hearing that happens within our public comment period. So our public comment period opened up yesterday, the 26th. That's when I posted the action plan and made it live. And that will go through May 30th. So we're a little over our 30-day limit there, but that's okay. So at this public hearing, we are accepting comments on the action plan from counselors, city staff, and the public. But we will also be accepting any comments on the plan, again, through May 30th via email, and that those comments can be sent to me. And my information is all over the action plan, all over the website, and I will share at the end of this presentation. So May 22nd, May 30th have question marks because these dates haven't been announced yet. I don't believe they've been scheduled officially, but in an ideal world, we're hoping to get BOF approval May 22nd and then City Council approval on May 30th. As soon as the City Council approves the action plan, I tie everything up in a nice neat bow and I send it off to HUD, and then pending their approval, we can start the program on July 1st. Meaning that the programs and projects that were given awards can start incurring costs for those projects that will be reimbursed with CDBG funds. And some resources here, excuse me, this presentation is on the CDNR webpage. So these resources and links can be accessed there. So this is a very high level overview of the action plan. The action plan document itself is around 57 pages. I highly recommend people check it out. There's a lot of great information and narrative in there that focuses on things outside of CDBG and home, focuses on like efforts and issues that the city and our partners are working on currently and hope to continue to work on in the coming year. So there's some really great narrative and information in there in the entire action plan. The CDBG program overview website, if you just want to know a little bit more about how the city and CEDO manages this program. The applications are public, so these are the 2023 applications that were reviewed by the CDBG Advisory Board. Anyone can get online and review those. The 7 days link, that's our legal notice for the public hearing on May 15th. So there's more details in that legal notice about that public hearing. And then if you want to do a really deep dive into home and CDBG, you can always go to the HUD website and spend hours and hours of time reading up on everything home and CDBG. And that's it. Nice and short presentation, but I'm happy to go back to any slides or answer any questions or take any comments for record that any committee members might have at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. I do have a few questions, but I'm going to give the floor to Joe and Hannah first if they have any questions.
I just have one quick question right now, Christine. I wonder if you have handy the affordable housing projects that are being supported with.
You're a little hard to hear, Joe.
Yeah, you're just a little muffled. I can't.
1 second. Is that better?
Yes, much better.
Okay, great. I just have a quick question about the affordable housing projects that are being supported. And if you have with that 643,000, the development.
Are you talking about the home projects? Okay.
Yeah, if you have a breakdown of where that funding is going for 2023.
Yeah, so I am not in the housing department in CEDO, but it is my understanding that, again, these come on a rolling basis, but as of right now, there are definitely 2 rental units that are going to be constructed with these home funds that you see on this slide. As of right now, again, since this kind of comes throughout the year on a rolling basis, that could change, but there are 2 committed already, and then there's an additional, I believe, 3 rental units going to be constructed with home ARP funds that aren't part of this funding source that you see right here, but still part of the overall home program.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Great. So a few questions and comments. The first one is just that I noticed there was no Ward 8 member of the advisory committee, and we have now, and I know CDNR is an ex officio member of the committee. So especially now that we have Hannah, I would say generally, if that's ever generally maybe just letting the committee know that those meetings are happening, just in case we want to join for the meetings. I trust the folks at the NPA, but knowing that Ward 8 this time didn't have representation, that would have been maybe nice for Hannah to have joined.
Yeah, so I just really quick before we move on, so I don't forget, we did have representation.
Okay.
And she, I believe she dropped out at the right before the meeting because of family emergency reasons. So we did have representation, but that's a great point, and definitely noted that moving forward, we should definitely kind of lean into you guys for sure in the future.
Great. And then a bigger question that I have is, do you know if any other towns use these funds as part, like in their participatory budget process, instead of having it be advisory or having folks apply? Not that we necessarily need that since we have overwhelming applications, but just curious if that's an option for these funds, just because we've been having that conversation at the NPA level.
What's the option you're proposing for?
Oh, sorry, just if there's a portion of these funds that could be set aside for some kind of NPA participatory budgeting, like creating community project.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think, I think we would definitely accept. So the notice of funding availability for CDBG funds gets released in December, and certainly I don't see why the NPAs couldn't apply, just thinking off the top of my head. So I think we would be open. I mean, everyone, regardless of their city department or a nonprofit or an NPA they have to apply. So I think they certainly should, and it's something we could talk about. It's not something we've done in practice since I've been doing this. This is like my 4th year, I think, doing this. But I don't see why they couldn't apply, and we could talk about that and consider that as an option. Yeah.
And then this isn't a question so much as a comment, just because I know we just went through redoing the rubric for the Housing Trust Fund, which is just that as we start getting more applications, I just am pretty solidly of the belief that you don't want to get many more applications than you can give funding out. So if we can do anything, well, one, either to streamline the application, it is quite long, so that as folks apply, at least they're not spending so much time doing it, or conversely, just making it a little bit more clear, like what we would prioritize so that folks who probably aren't going to get it aren't using their time. So that's maybe a suggestion for future years, is just trying to limit how many folks are applying and not getting the grant.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Great. Hannah or Joe, anything else on this? Or actually, I guess, any other questions, and then we can move to a motion. Great, then somebody willing to make the motion to.
I have some motion language from the city attorney. I already reached out to the city attorney to make this official, just in case. I'll just throw the motion in the chat. Okay.
I'm happy to move to have the CDNR committee sponsor the 2023 action plan resolution to be brought before the Burlington City Council as soon as practicable.
Would you like to second?
Yeah, sure.
Great, thanks. So motion made by Councillor McGee, seconded by Councillor King. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that passes unanimously. And sorry, Hannah, I feel like this is always one of the first things that happens in this committee, and it's one of the more less like opinion-based, more confusing ones. But yeah, thanks for that presentation, Christine. And I think it's back to you for the next item. Is that true?
To me?
Sorry, do we have the action plan? Is that on the agenda even?
No, that's the overview I just gave.
Got it. Okay. Got it. Okay. Oh, those felt, yeah. Sorry, the word in PowerPoint. Got it. Okay. So the next item, we might be done early. The next item, I say that, now we're going to spend 2 hours talking about it. The next item is from me, which I have to admit is not a full resolution, because I figured I started working on them, then I realized I wasn't going to get it to the council agenda by Tuesday noon. So I just wanted to have the resolve clauses for this committee to look at, because it's been here. Joe, do you mind giving Hannah an overview just of what's happened so far and where we're at? And obviously, Sarah, feel free to jump in at any point.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do a quick update. So we started having this conversation around camping as a result.
February 2023.
Yeah. I introduced a resolution in February of 2022 that stemmed from a lot of concern around the way that the Sears Lane removal happened, and really calling for us to take a look at the city's policies around camping and folks sheltering on public land. and it got referred to CDNR last February, and we've been having the conversation in pieces over the last several months, and we've really started to get some movement on it late last year and into this year. And so we're starting to move in this direction of trying to figure out what the next steps are for us to look at the city's camping policies and figure out what changes need to be made. And through that, we've had conversations with city staff, with the Chittenden County Homeless Alliance, and really just trying to wrap our heads around who's involved in making decisions around removing a campsite, what kind of support is available for folks if those removals do have to take place. And I think, at the core of this has always been making it as clear as possible for folks who are faced with that impossible decision of having to sleep outside. How can we make it as clear as possible where that can happen? And so that's where we're at, and I look forward to figuring out what the language in this resolution will look like.
Great. And to talk a little bit about what the intention is with this. So I think basically we was stalled a little bit. So we got a lot of feedback from other folks in November and December, I think. Not a lot, but we went to one meeting each of city staff, kind of wider Chittenden County homelessness advocates, and then one that was like a mix of city staff and on the ground kind of folks providing that support in Burlington. And so I feel like since then we've stalled a little bit into how to move forward. Like we've agreed that, not formally, but we've informally agreed that we don't necessarily want to move forward with the policy as written, but also that we need to do something. And a committee per our city council rules can't ask a staff member to spend a lot of time on something without the city council agreeing on it as a whole. So I started to draft this basically to do one of two things that we think needs to happen. One is the ACLU, our current policy. Joe may have just said this, I wasn't listening. Okay, great, did not. Our current policy was dictated to some extent by a settlement reached between the city and the ACLU. And so we'd have to engage them if we wanted to make any changes to it. I don't necessarily foresee that being a strong problem, just because they tend to be supportive of changes to make things more humane as they are the ACLU. But that is definitely something that we need to do. And the mayor's office is the one that negotiates anything around legalities, just because having counselors in the mix can be few too many cooks in the kitchen. And then the second piece is around figuring out what the right solution is, because well, we've kind of moved away from like a broad allowance and maybe have more thought about sanction camping. City staff did have a lot of concerns around what that looks like. And also there's an acknowledgement that we need like outside support to make that happen. And we don't really I think as a committee, it's hard to do that research to dig into that. And so some kind of resolution to give Sarah the ask to look into that further. And Sarah, I see you have your hand up, and hopefully that's helpful, Hannah, and not way too much information all at once. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thanks. I appreciate both of you, sort of sharing where we've been on this. It's helpful for me. Hannah, I've been with the city for a year and I'm in a new position. So I'm constantly, sort of learning and catching up a little bit about, processes for policy change. And I think one of the things that I wanted to clarify, which is something that may be helpful to you or may be helpful to this group, but was really helpful to me as I was, beginning this work, is that there's a difference between the policy and the ordinance. And I think that there is, the way the ordinance reads right now is that there's no camping in parks within the city. The policy talks about how to respond to people camping in the city. So that, and the policy needs to be updated. If anything, it was drafted as you all said, with support from the ACLU, but that was a while ago and before we had, new roles within the city, it predates the CSL team, in all honesty. So there's a lot of updates that need to happen to the policy. Now, I just want to be clear, just for my own understanding, are you all talking about revising the ordinance or revising the policy? Because I think that's important, because to me, the ordinance is like, that's the rule, right? And the policy is how you implement the rule. So I just want to be clear about what exactly you're hoping to achieve through this.
Right. And to some extent, I think I even forgot to some extent that we had that conversation. And sorry, this is me getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but also I think that might be a good thing to put as the one and move everything else back as like suggestions for changes to the policy. And then I guess I'm curious as to what extent I feel like I care less about what it is that we're changing and care more about, like, let's decide what we want to do and then make the appropriate changes to whatever documents we need to make that happen. I don't know if right now we feel like the policy is at odds with the ordinance. If the ordinance says you can't, and then the policy says, oh, we want to have flexibility, like in like how we enforce this and when we enforce this. That's not what the policy says per se, but like that is what we heard from staff, that's what the policy essentially gives them. So I think the priority is the policy. And then if we need to change the ordinance to reflect, to not contradict the changes in policy. But I don't know if Joe or Hannah has a different opinion. So they both shook their, is that helpful, Sarah?
Yeah, to me, as I think about I think that the policy, it's hard for me to when we talk about revising the policy, it's hard because the policy is what you would use to enforce the ordinance or to decide how you were going to, enforce the ordinance. So if you're not talking about changing the ordinance at this point, I think that it's really kind of, like you said, I think you have to sort of decide what it is you want to do and then decide which of the documents it makes the most sense to revise.
Right. And I assume I don't know, I don't know that the change in policy would necessarily require council action, but obviously the ordinance would. So I feel like one of the reasons to bring the council along with this is that if there's a change in policy that requires a change in ordinance, that would obviously require council action.
I'll just say, I think it would probably make sense for us to change the ordinance to some extent. I think we're not always going to have I don't know, I guess I'll just say I trust the folks doing this work right now to address camping in as humane a way as possible. but I don't necessarily know that that will always be the case. And my reason for wanting this ordinance change in the first place was just acknowledging that fact, is that, finding a balance of amending the rules such that, it doesn't, we're not criminalizing folks for sleeping outside if that's the only option that they have. And, because the policy can shift without council action, I hope the day doesn't come where that happens and it becomes more restrictive. But, I would rather not count on that. And so that's sort of my thinking there. I know that the ordinance that we proposed is a little more far-reaching than I think a lot of us are comfortable with, and I understand that. And so, I don't want a change to the ordinance to be completely off of the table if that is something that would benefit folks. So I'll just say that.
And I think also, like I said, I'm not sure that there's at least the way we've been talking about it, I don't see how there could be a change in policy, especially if we're doing things like, if we get to sanction camping, that's not allowed under the current ordinance. So even if that becomes part of the policy, I feel like if we end up making a change to the policy, we'll probably have to create a change to the ordinance. Christine, I don't know if you saw, but I just threw the language for the thing into the chat. Everybody's got access to it anyway, but if we
To everyone in the chat.
Great. Thanks, Christine. So this is just where I started. And Sarah, I'm definitely happy to hear if you don't think this makes sense to you. So I'm going to focus on the second. The first one is just asking the mayor's office to engage the ACLU to try to figure out what some of their parameters would be for change. And come back to the full council by June 5th. And then the second one, and to be clear, this wouldn't go in front of the council if we did pass it until May 15th. So we may want to push back that date as well. And then the second one is to ask Sarah to do some research. And I now feel like rather than having there, I said 2 topics, which is a different version than the one I sent you this morning, Sarah, based on the first feedback that I got. But one is camping options when shelter capacity has been reached. 2, storage and bathroom access at the CDNR, or sorry, storage and bathroom access. I confused it by taking out the first thing. And then I wonder if we want to make the first one then just general changes to the policy. And actually, I think you said you've worked on that already, right?
So what I have worked on was, and what I've done is gone through with a fine-tooth comb the current policy and found where it needs to be updated to reflect current practice. But it sounds like you're wanting to potentially change current practice. So I would need to know whether to like pause on those changes or to, sort of wait to see what the decision is around changing current practice.
I mean, I think I would be really interested in what, the groups of like city staff and the folks who are doing work on the ground, like what they think and what you think would be the best, not current, like what it's reflection of current practice, which is helpful to have, but like where we want to be going for practice and to start there.
I think that some decisions need to be made by the mayor's office around the specific roles that each that sort of each team. So there are different folks who are doing this work that are completely not in the current policy. So we have the CSLs in the police department. We have the urban park rangers out of Parks and Rec. We have the new function of the CSOs out of the police department. And we also, which I became aware of not too long ago, the Parks and Beach Patrol out of the, which I was calling the yellow shirts, which I'm not going to do that anymore, but out of the police department. Although I heard that the park rangers are fine with being called the green shirts for some reason. So I guess that's okay, but yellow shirts is not. So all of so those folks sort of, I think that there's a role for each of those different teams within the policy. One of the things that I think is super important that we shift a little bit about current practice is that we don't have the same team providing support and referral and building trusting relationships with people, also be the same team that issues them a notice to vacate that camping site, because that goes against best practice. I think across the board, you can't have a supportive intervention provided by the same source of compliance and enforcement, because it truly erodes trust with folks. So that's an example of one of the things that I think that we need to sort of decide around, who's filling which role.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So that's the work, I guess, summarize, sorry, to go back to your original question. That's an example of the work that I've been doing on the policy, is to catch it up to speed, but there are some decision points that need to be made before we can, even sort of update the policy to reflect current practice.
Okay. Hannah or Joe, any thoughts on that before I don't mean to monopolize the discussion. Okay, great. So I know. So one, curious as to where folks are leaning into potentially supporting something, because we won't have a meeting in before the next city council meeting that has some of these resolve clauses. One, I know that I'm meeting with Jordan next week. I'm inclined, given to how slow this has moved, to err on the side of putting into resolution that we'd like, the mayor, that we're asking the mayor to come to some decisions on things like that by a certain date, which then gives us a new timeline for, once we kind of know what we want to do in terms of changing it, to go to ACLU and say, this is how we're planning on changing it. And Sarah, this is maybe a silly question, but the lawsuit, I don't know if you know the answer to this, Sarah or Joe, the lawsuit was for both, or helped to decide both the ordinance and the policy, correct? Not just the ordinance. No.
The ordinance wasn't changed as a result.
Just the policy.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So then if we want to change the policy, okay, so where we want to go with that, so that we can ask the mayor by a certain timeline, maybe not the 5th, but whatever the meeting is after that, to come back to the council and let us know how that conversation went, presumably in executive session. Gail Rafferty asked the question, who's responsible for policy changes? I'm pretty sure it's just the administration. I think it's an administrative function, and then unless it rises, of course, to the level of an ordinance, in which case it's the city council. So both do policy. And then, so the second question, so I don't know if we want, I just added one thing, but laying that aside and kind of knowing that that's going to be a stone process. The second part is the kind of ask from you, Sarah, which I think is also just me wanting to make sure that that the council is asking you to spend the time as opposed to this committee. is working with folks on the ground to, one, which is not in there right now, suggest like a better option for the policy. And then two, after that, starting to look at like camping options. Does that seem like the right order to folks? Like one, having the update to the policy, two, then even having the discussion on if we do sanction camping, what does that look like? Or another, I don't feel like I want to say for sure that sanction camping is going to be the answer. I think that's just kind of what we got to after the first round. And then three, any improvements to storage and bathroom access. Does that seem feasible for you, Sarah, given your other workload? Is that going to infringe on more important work?
I can start. I mean, I'm pretty good at multitasking and prioritizing, so I'm not as concerned about that. I mean, I think that one of the things that, you know, we could consider, one of the things that I want, you know, you to consider, or for all of us to consider as we, you know, talk about the policy, is that designating specific places for people to camp is harder than designating places for where people cannot camp. And I think that, you know, I implemented smoke-free housing policies and public housing for you know, we were I think the second housing authority in the country here in Burlington to implement those smoke-free policies. And the best practice from everywhere was to have designated non-smoking areas opposed to designated smoking areas, because then you become very responsible for, you know, for it in a different way when you're designating those areas. And I don't know that any of the teams within the city or within our current outreach, you know, and you know, nonprofit community have the capacity to be able to provide the level of support that we might need around that. So that's just something I would want to like caution, you know, around as you kind of think about that.
Yeah, and the way, I don't know if you saw, but the way that I tried to give some flexibility on that is like camping options when shelter capacity has been reached, because I won't claim to know that we got to a definitive answer. So hopefully that's broad enough that it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's real, you know, like I especially around the shelter. I mean, we are at full shelter capacity. There's no shelter capacity right now in Chittenden County, and we have, you know, we have a estimated 70 folks who are outside right now just within Burlington, and the motel program closing could, you know, send a lot more people out of motels on July 1st. So I think that it's important for us to be thinking about this for sure.
Great. Great. So I'm re-updating some of the possible language. Sorry, Christine, I'm being very annoying into the chat. If you can repost it to everyone. Yeah, and then just Hannah or Joe, just thoughts on what you want to do in terms of direction. If we think that this resolves something is something we want to resolve language is something. And actually, I don't even know that we need to decide today if we want to sponsor it. I wonder if I can just send it to everyone. I don't actually know what the public laws around. Joe, do you know? Is that something that we can just co-sponsor if I send it to everyone after?
I am not sure. I think probably because we've already had a lot of discussion about it in open meeting. Like once it's finalized, I don't know if we might need a motion.
I mean, I think we do it. We can do full council sponsorships if the maker goes around to getting it. So I don't know why we wouldn't be able to do full committee sponsorships. So I think as long as we don't discuss it over email and you all just say yes or no to sponsoring it, that would be enough.
I guess we could make a motion to sponsor pending.
Whereas clauses. And then you're not going to agree with any of my very I don't even know what that's called. Contentious whereas clauses.
Oh.
So anything, do those feel okay to, and I'm also asking you, Sarah, do those feel okay to folks? Since we can't discuss it offline and or happy to take a motion to sponsor pending the whereas clauses.
I'm curious, I know Jordan seemed to take some or have some concern around asking specific staff members. I mean, I don't know what, it may be that you might have to further amend that because that seemed to be something that she focused on for some reason. And again, I don't know the precedent for any of this, but that may need to change. I'm not sure. She indicated in her email, I was unclear about that. Do you know what she meant?
Yeah, we don't name, and I wonder if that was the issue.
Okay.
Sorry, Christine, I just did it again. So I took out, I think we usually don't name people. So I think it's unusual to have like Sarah Russell, Marcella Grange. So I don't know if it was the titles, if she just wanted to have CEDO or, but I know for sure we usually don't have people's names in it. So we should.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest maybe just CEDO in general, I think.
I feel good about that.
Yeah.
And maybe it's, research, I guess, maybe it's researching best practice around camping options when shelter, because I think that, what I would want to do this thoughtfully, I would want to understand what, like size and like climate cities are doing around camping to see if we can glean any best practice from that as well.
Great. I'm gonna just screen share so folks can see what I'm doing. So Christine doesn't have to keep repasting in the chat. Great. And then the whereas clauses, I think, would just highlight some of the history that Joe and I gave and some of the, upcoming issues with current shelter capacity and the upcoming May 31st motel voucher end.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I don't have motion language pre-made and I'm already stumbling over my words. So Joe, I'm just going to look to you to figure it out.
I would move that the CDNR committee sponsor this resolution named resolution relating to process for updating sheltering and public lands policy given our homeless growth and end of the motel voucher program pending the addition of whereas clauses and final language for resolve clauses.
Second.
Great. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Great. That passes unanimously. Let me go back to the agenda. So, Michael, was there, not to call you out, but was there you, Michael, or Gail or Betsy? We had a few more folks join us. Was there anyone who had any comments before we turn to other business?
Joe mentioned yesterday that this was happening, and I've been working a little bit on the side with some other residents in the Old North End. A few of us are contributing to some of the mutual aid efforts in the city and have been kind of working with Food Not Cops and Food Not Bombs and a few kind of more grassroots organizations to provide resources to the unhoused and homeless population. Joe and Patrick, who works for COTS, and myself have had some chats over the last few months. I'm curious as a constituent and as a resident where I can help, because I was involved with a few programs on the West Coast that were very successful in terms of providing storage resources for the unhoused and homeless in huge shipping containers that were in West LA on the beach that were really helpful, really successful, really effective, and are really critical and crucial resources. I also live right across the street from the Elmwood shelter. And there's been a lot of just sidewalk chats about how not having a place for people to store their stuff, their bikes, their backpacks, their personal possessions, computers, important papers, things like that, has been really just impactful. And that a lot of the things that we provide for unhoused and homeless folks through kind of a loose mutual aid network, camping gear, clothing, backpacks, theft, and vandalism are probably the number one reason that people come back and ask for these items sometimes a week later, and it's really tragic. And we have a very generous pool of donors that provide financial support, so some of us can go out and do some shopping and then bring these items every day downtown at 1 o'clock to folks that need them, including phone cards, phones, gas cards, things like that. And storage would really help immensely. And so I'm here also as someone that was a part of the city of Hartford's, town of Hartford's task force on homelessness from 2019, which is where I moved here from, in White River Junction. And we had a pretty extensive series of committee hearings and testimonials and members of the in-house community and the committee itself to provide a framework for a report that was issued to the town in January 2020 that I emailed to all the city councilmen maybe about a year or two ago, and is also available as a tool to kind of maybe guide some of these other decisions like storage and other kind of immediate and longer term kind of solutions that the town proposed for itself. So anyway, that in a nutshell is the reason I'm on the call, and Joe invited yesterday and Patrick couldn't make it, but it sounds like it's going the right direction. And the storage thing, if there's anything I can do to kind of help move that along, if it's providing testimony or more information about maybe places where it could be, or maybe we can find a shipping container that can be donated, or making it easy for solutions to kind of maybe roll out if some of these resources are kind of investigated. Anyway, so nice to see everybody. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and thank you for allowing me to kind of give a quick little intro there.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate that. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that. Michael, I'd love to talk to you more about that. We had talked about some storage at the library, but it didn't feel sufficient for what the need was. And we had some, some differing opinions on what the vessel for storage might be. But one of the things that I would love to see is the city roll out kind of a program where we might provide a container, and different, nonprofits or businesses could, sponsor that on site. We could provide sample language around an agreement and administration, and really, engage the community in a broader way like that. Also, I think that could make it more accessible, opposed to having it in one, specific location. But so that's definitely something that I've been talking to the city attorney about. And also we consulted with, I want to say it was Austin, maybe, on on a storage program that they had there as well. But I'd love to hear from you more about your experiences and thoughts on that. So thanks for bringing that up. Storage is a huge issue.
Yeah, there's a good program in Boston. I think there's one in Albany as well, and they're searchable, and they have websites and links that be happy to share. But yeah, it's a common problem everywhere, but it's a fairly straightforward solution, so relatively.
Great. Well, not seeing anything else. I'm going to be annoying and request that we try to, Hannah, Christine, Joe, and I try to find our next meeting now rather than via doodle poll. So folks could just get their calendars for the May meeting. Which I'm going to go and suggest the week of the 22nd.
The 24th or 25th are fine for me.
Yeah, I could do the either also, right, 5 o'clock.
Same here. I want to mention, if it's all right, I just heard from Rebecca Reese, the ELI manager. She was hoping to bring an ELI update to you all at the May meeting, if that's okay.
Right. Is that early enough for her or?
Yeah, definitely. She said anytime in May or June. So I think I should probably rather do it sooner rather than later. So if we don't have a super busy agenda, if we could get something on the books for May, she'd be happy to get that scheduled too, I'm sure.
Okay, great. I do have, unfortunately, I'm holding both of those days for a work meeting and it will only be on one of the days and I should know by tomorrow which one it is. So let's hold the 24th and 25th and then I'll let folks know by early next week.
Do we want to stick with a 5 p.m. start time?
Does that work for folks starting at 5?
5 works for me.
Yeah.
Then let's do 5 a.m.
Okay.
5
Great.
a.m. 5 p.m. start time.
Great.
Great. Well, then without, it's not what it's called, but dissent, we'll close the meeting at 6:02. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.